So we're back working on the 60 MGA restoration project. So what I've been working on so far here today is wet sanding and rubbing out the boot lid here, which I'm not showing the process because we just did that last video. And now I'm working on finishing rubbing out the tops of the doors, because when I had these things on the stands I could do the face of the door, but I couldn't really wrap around here too well because the stands move around too much. So I waited till I got them bolted on and I'm doing this. And if you notice, I got the rest of the car all covered up so I don't splatter all over everything, including the dashboard. Now this steering wheel doesn't matter because this is just an old crappy one that's on there just to steer it, and then we got a different steering wheel to put on it later. So the other thing I've been working on today is I got the boot lid seal in place. Now when you do these seals, I didn't film it, but you should always clean the back side of the seal here with like prep solvent or something to get the mold release agent off of it first. And then we glue it on with something like this super weather strip adhesive here. I tend to like to use the black, but the black is not available in these small tubes, and I'm still having so much trouble finding my stuff that the owner bought that locally here at the local store. So you put some weather strip adhesive. You actually put some in the channel and on the back side of the rubber, let it tack up, and put it in very much like a rubber cement. And you'll always have a little extra. But when you're doing it, you want to make sure you don't like stretch it any. If anything, you're going to kind of almost bunch it up slightly in there. But then if you bunch it up too much, your trunk lid won't sit very well, or your boot lid, sorry. One thing we have a problem with on these is with a new seal, the boot lid doesn't want to sit perfectly flush because it's too thick and it won't sit really nice. Same thing we have on the Bs. MGBs are that way. I always use the late seal on the Bs myself because it's easier to get the trunk lid to pull down and sit where you want than with the early seal that's in the channel. But we have the same problem with this. It's like the rubber's either just a hair too thick or just not quite soft enough rubber. But you just get the best you can because that's what we got to work with. Now I've also been working on wet sanding and rubbing out the taillight housings, or plinths, sorry, which can be a little bit difficult to do because how do you hold on to the buffer and these at the same time? Myself, I put bolts in the bottom here where they mount, then I hold the bolts in a vise, and then just be very careful and keep the buffer at a slower speed and really pay attention to the edges so you don't catch edges and burn the paint off. Well, we got the boot lid on there. We got a pretty decent fit all the way around here. Now, like I said, with the new seals, you won't get these things to sit perfectly flat. This one actually doesn't sit too bad. A lot of times they're sticking a little more proud than this. But you're going to notice it most across the bottom here, which we feel a little bit more on the bottom than we are up the sides. But you basically are going to get it just to the point where it's a little difficult to latch, where you got to put some pretty good pressure on it to get the latch, and that's about as best as you're going to get it. And you're not going to be perfectly flush, except maybe up here at the top. But even then, it's very unlikely because the seal's still pushing that up, which we don't have it here. But that's about as good as it's going to get, and slightly better than you usually get on an MGB. So that's what it is. So now I'm going to work on polishing this thing, because at this point like I said, I've done just the rubbing out, and doing the polish will take out any swirl marks that might be in there from the rubbing, which there will be some, and we'll just brighten it up a little bit more and even the surface finishing out quite a bit. And to do that, we got a softer foam pad with less waffling that's made just for the polishing process. So I set up time lapse and we'll get to it. And also, you notice I've got the whole front of the car covered up, so I'll do the whole back of the car first and wipe it all down. Then I'll move the cover to the back, and then we'll do the front of the car. So it's really hard to tell in this lighting that it made a real big difference. But, you know, when you're using this stuff, if you slather too much on there, it just kind of cakes up and on the surface and doesn't work well. So you got to be a little more sparing with it than with the rubbing compound. But then when you're done, you rub it out and you wipe it off, you can actually usually hear it sounds different. You can hear squeaking noises because it's actually leaving like a glaze behind. What I think this actually is, I'm using a 3M machine polish. What I think this is the replacement for the old 3M foam polishing pad glaze. I think it's pretty much the same stuff, but different part number, different name. But that's what I'm finding now under the new, now that they've renamed everything, the Perfect-It system. But it does leave kind of a glaze behind. Now the bad part about this glaze is you can take your fingernail and rub across the surface and you'll put marks in that glaze, but it rubs right back out. So once you've glazed it, you need to put a coat of wax on it to keep from getting those, I want to call them scuffs, but not really scuffs because it's in the glaze, not the paint. Which we will put a coat of wax on this thing here today before we finish assembling it, because that will actually do a really good job helping protect all the parts of the car while we're finishing the assembly. And the paint's been on here long enough that there's no worries about that. All right, so now that I've done the back half, I've moved the cover around to the back, and now we're going to do the front half. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the wheels back on it, get it on the ground, and take it outside in the sun, see how it looks like in the sunlight. And one thing it'll also do for me is with it on the ground, I can verify the doors are opening and closing properly with it sitting on 4 wheels before I finish the rest of the assembly. All right, so now I got it outside into the sunlight. Like I said before, this is no show quality paint job. It's just supposed to be nice driver. Never intended for show use. But I also am the type that can't help myself on the body work. I can't stand wavy body work, even if it's just going to be a driver. But for those of you who have not been following along from the beginning, this is Nissan Aztec Red and base coat clear coat. Originally he said he wanted Rosso Red because he is into Italian cars as well, but then he saw a customer of mine that had an MGA in this shade of red and said, I like that. That's what I want. I took it down to the part store and they put it on, or the paint store, put it under spectrometer, and this is what color they come up with. It's a nice, easy color to get a hold of, not expensive, and it should be easy to match if anything were to ever happen to it in the future. And you can easily go over to the parts store, pick up a rattle can of that paint code for touch-up if he, like say, gets a damage on the very bottom edge or something, and it'll be close enough that no one will notice. So, very practical color as well. So now I just got to take a good hard look at everything on this car, make sure it all looks good in the sunlight, because the lighting in that shop is not that good. The best way to rub and buff all this stuff out is under fluorescent lighting. That is the harshest possible lighting you can look at paint jobs under. If it looks good under that, it'll look awesome in the sunlight. But there it is. Now we can finish putting it together. So that's it this time on the MGA. So next time we'll probably get into putting taillight housings on and starting to wire some of the lights in. We were going to start putting the windshield on, but we didn't have all the screws, and right now the screw kit's on back order, so that's going to have to wait. But at any rate, this is MG Rob. Later.